Time and time again, I mean, you can always talk about, sort of technical, you can always talk about like, sort of other aspects like, hey, you need to figure out how you can scalably do something, or you need to figure out like what's the return on value or things like that. I believe all those things are to be true. But I do believe that it's one of the most important things to have people that you truly can actually really work together and cooperate with in a way that actually can be better than the sum of your parts, right?
Mm.
I know that's a cliched phrase, but really, people, the folks that you work with, are some of the most important considerations that you make. I've seen so many times where founders, it's crazy too. Like founders that I know who they founded the company together, and they had disagreements about sort of how the equity would be broken up because they didn't have an agreement when they started.
Yeah. Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest on our podcast, Mike Liu. And Mike, since high school, always knew we wanted to do his own business, and felt like it always be have plenty of time in the future to go towards that goal. During college, thought about or why he wasn't doing a startup yet, but ended up studying material science and engineering during college and graduate school. Wrapped up a PhD, started to look at the ideas for the path for a startup. COVID hit, and so he started working on a startup focused on video content for learning. Has launched his business, and he'll share a little bit more about that. So, with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Mike.
Thanks, Devin. I really appreciate being able to be here. Just a hello to all the folks at home, taking a listen, of course. And I really appreciate that nice preamble about sort of myself and my journey. It's been a fantastic opportunity to just see what works and what doesn't. It's been just a lot of learning, I would say, like anything in life. And it's just been really special to be able to build something that you feel like people can get a lot of value of and can or get a value out of and can enjoy.
Awesome. Now,
Um,
before we get too much into the present day, is the
sure,
podcast is about the journey. So let's rewind and start at the beginning rather
totally.
than at the end. So maybe to rewind, so it sounds like your journey started in high school, kind of always knowing that you wanted to do a startup or to do your own business. So tell us a little bit about how the journey got started.
Sure, absolutely. Funny story. It's when you feel like there are inklings of things that you want to do even as a kid, right? But you don't really know how to express that. Like some people are like, "Hey, I want to be an astronaut," and like, or I want to be like an athlete and stuff. There was something about even when I was a kid, like wanting to just build something that really mattered. And I feel like it was one of those things that you have a call for, even when you're at a very young age. Of course, I didn't know startups, right? Like there's no idea of what that was. I was a kid before the dot-com boom, right? So obviously, when things like pets.com and like all of these other like new internet companies popped up, it's kind of just like a Wild West sort of time, right? So moving on to, as I got older and understanding sort of what was being made out there, of course, one of the, initial success stories you hear about was like MySpace, right? Like this tool that everybody could use that connected people. There's like these, walls and like, top 8 friends and things like that. So I'm probably dating myself slightly in regards to that. But it was always just so fascinating to me to be able to build things that just so many people could appreciate, that so many people could use all at the same time, that you have this one shared collective experience. And to me, I always just kind of was tinkering in my head with what are the things that really provide, people value, right? And then of course, obviously, Facebook comes along and I was in high school and just kind of, sort of took over the mantle of what MySpace was doing. But kind of the seed was planted there, right? Like, how can I best create something that I feel like could actually impact other people's lives? And from there, it really just stuck with me, right? It was just a place where I wanted to figure out how can I do something that would, mean something to other people. What could I do? And it was never, sort of starting off with, hey, I need to like achieve massive scale, but it was just to start off small, start off with something that even in this the smallest little kernel could actually go and maybe flourish into something great, but just getting that detail correct. So that stuck with me for a while. I was, going to college, learning engineering, trying to figure out what could possibly be, an interesting idea. Engineering felt like, well, hey, I can build things. I can build things that are actually going to, actually have some outsized impact for people. But there was never really that one to one. I can see a throughway path to where I can actually apply these skills directly and have that impact on what people are doing. It
Mm.
was a lot of experiments. There were things that were contributing to maybe a larger principle that could go out and actually help people. But it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like I was immediately getting the opportunity to actually have something that was in people's hands, and even just like a wider spread of people that I could interact with and just learn from and understand and iterate on different ideas with. So that stuck with me even as I, kind of popped out of undergrad, worked for a little bit. It was always just kind of in the back of my mind, but
Now, one
something
quick
and maybe,
question. So you popped out of undergrad. So you got the undergraduate degree, graduated. Now, what did you? I guess you hit on it. Was it engineering? Was that the undergraduate degree?
correct. Yeah. So that was all material science engineering. And during that time, I felt like, I was just fresh out of college. You want to go ahead and get a job. Everyone kind of tells you like, hey, go out into the working world, see what it's like, feel kind of like how that experience is. So I did for a couple years, and then I realized, well, why don't I try and learn some more
Now,
and
what this real
apply
quick
myself.
question, just to
Sure.
jump in. So when you before you went back, and because I think you're headed towards going to graduate school, but what did
Mhm.
you do for those couple of years? Because you said you kind of always had that entrepreneur desire, that that bent, so to speak. But
Mhm.
what was that? What was that initial entrance into the working world?
Yeah, totally. So, I worked initially as a sales engineer, applying the material science skills to tell you, hey, you can actually go and, purchase materials from us. And a lot of actually what this was kind of like my first foray into actually making business deals, which was why I was so excited about it. Because, when we were actually sourcing some of the materials, some of those I'd have to source from partners. So I'd have to actually go and coordinate a whole bunch of people to be able to fulfill an order request or fulfill a, sort of client request about whatever it is that they were wanting from our catalog of products, right? And we would have, of course, initial precursor products and things like that. So using that knowledge and getting really creative, that was really sort of stoking the fire of how can I figure out, problem solving wise, how to meet the request of what someone has for us, while
Hmm.
at the same time coordinating it in a timely manner so that they can get their sort of end goods in a quick enough amount of time that they could get their projects done. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of creativity, and a lot of sort of logistical planning to actually put all these things together. And I found that I really enjoyed that aspect of it, figuring out, okay, here is their actual like asking price, here's like what we have in terms of prospective partners to be able to deliver that particular element. How do I piece together all these pieces? And it's
Hmm.
funny, I liked that way more than I liked the actual science of it, right? Which was already kind of an indication of where I would be going. So that was kind of like one job that I did initially, and then I moved into being a lab manager for a while. It was more of like a cup of coffee before I went to grad school, basically. But after I finished up and wrapped up that sales role and started preparing for the GRE, worked as a lab manager for a little while, and basically during that time, I also learned to kind of notice how important it is to actually deal with folks who were working under you, because I was in a management position at one point, and I realized, sort of how some of these people felt like they weren't being heard as well. So kind of in more of like the human resources aspect, I was actually feeling like, some of these people weren't feeling as heard. They weren't feeling like their opinions mattered, and it was a consistent thing across like multiple people. And I was managing folks that were older than me as well, so it was a very interesting kind of dynamic. But it also lent me, kind of some of those experiences lent me some great insights on how I actually work today and managing the company myself. So those forays into the working world kind of gave me an idea of, okay, so science is interesting, but really I have the excitement and passion for getting these deals done. That's exciting. And then I wanted to also learn how to create a culture that could really work really well in the future. So all of those, kind of mixed together with the still, aspect of trying to start my own company. And I think
Now,
that one of the
and you
hardest.
and you mentioned, but before you or went dived into the starting your own company, you went back to grad school for a period of time. So now what made you decide to go back to grad school as opposed to starting your own company, as opposed to staying in the working world? Kind of how did you make that decision, or decide to take that next step?
Sure. So, I think that at the time I realized, and maybe this sounds a little, silly, but I honestly got to a point in that lab manager position where I really was actually finding work to do rather than actually, it just wasn't challenging, right? Like it didn't
Hmm.
have a challenge. It didn't have that sort of feeling of I'm actually contributing to something, larger, or having that feeling of a true sort of mission in what I feel like I was capable of doing. And so I was really passing the days like actually trying to find like ways for me to improve the work around me, or the work, like the actual workplace around me. And at a certain point I kind of came to the thought process of, okay, I mean, I think what's very clear here, it's probably time for me to move on and actually go do something else. And I felt like the best way to advance myself was to actually go and get a graduate degree. It made a lot of sense. Really wanted to buckle down and obviously take my material science engineering skills to a whole nother place. And I felt like, from my previous position as a sales engineer, I just kind of thought to myself, well, if I really enjoyed that, then having more information and knowledge is really going to help me even do roles like that better. Or perhaps I could, eventually graduate into, some more management positions and then move forward in a company. But even that still didn't feel as correct as like wanting to start my own company. But of course, when you're somebody who's kind of sort of gone through being working in a place, and then thinking to yourself, hey, how am I going to start something from scratch? You don't normally think to yourself, oh, hey, I have all the resources here, especially if you're not really educated on the subject. I hadn't started looking up startups. I didn't realize how easy it was to make like a Squarespace or like a Wix site. And for me, I felt like I needed to at least build some, sort of capital and savings to actually be able to jump into that foray down the road. So it just made a lot of sense to actually just improve my station in life with actually building out my own knowledge. So, I took the plunge, went into grad school. And so I went to like Texas A&M, right? And I have this really, really funny story of while I was actually doing that lab manager role, I had never actually gone to the school at that
Hmm.
point, right? So they gave me my acceptance in February of like 2015, and I'm supposed to visit the school sometime in June. And I'm trying to arrange the meeting, right? And so what happens is I email them, I ask them, hey, when are we going to do this? I was in contact with this person who was working there at the time. And what happened was, I guess between the time in which I was supposed to do that, sort of walkthrough meeting, and when I actually, between that time of when I was supposed to do the walkthrough meeting and when I got the acceptance, I guess like she had moved on to another position, and the logistics of that particular department hadn't caught up with it. So I didn't receive anything back about going. And I just assumed that perhaps maybe the offer was rescinded or something. So I didn't hear from anybody, called the office, tried to talk to somebody. But unfortunately, every time you try to call an office of a university department, sometimes there's kids or students working there, right?
Hmm.
So the students would kind of say, "Hey, I'll let the academic advisor know that you called. I don't really know who talks, who obviously handles that, but I'll try and figure it out for you." Never heard anything, right? And then eventually July rolls around. The start date of the school's in August, by the way. And so a month before, I get a phone call from them, and they're like, "Hey, just wanted to, call. Is this Mike?" And I was like, "Yeah. Hey, how's it going? Who's this?" And they're like, "Oh, hey, this is, the material science engineering department, Texas A&M. Just wanted to let you know that, I just wanted to ask, are you still interested in, coming out to our program?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely interested. I've been calling you guys for like 2 months. What's been going on?" And they're like, "Oh, we're really sorry. Basically the person who you were working with ended up like leaving the department, and now, we're kind of like, sort of realigning and getting everybody in." And of course, I'm like, "Okay, great." And they're like, "Well, do you want to like visit?" And I was like, "Well, no. I mean, school starts in a month. I don't really think I can visit. Let's
Hmm.
just see what happens." So, I gave basically rolled the dice on whether like I would actually like this place or not. I had a few offers other places, but I was like, well, Texas A&M is, a good school, a good name brand. Basically, I was sure that I would be able to get a high quality education. And funny enough, so the day I'm supposed to leave, right, I hop on the plane, have my car transported, and I was living at the time in the Bay Area, right? And I'd never really lived outside of the West Coast. So when the plane is flying over the mountains and into Texas, I remember thinking to myself, it's probably a bad idea that I'd never check this place out. I wonder what's going to happen. And of course, as the plane starts like going into the airport that's actually in, College Station where Texas A&M is at, I remember like peering over the side of like the plane and thinking to myself, "Oh, there's like there's steadily and steadily less city that I see. Oh, there's just a lot of green. There's oh, the plane is starting to descend. I don't know what's going on." And so there was kind of a moment where in the back of my mind, I was like, I might have just dedicated myself to the next like 2 years and really just, might have made a mistake here.
Hmm.
And I remember that first day, got off the plane, never dealt with humidity for folks who are listening at home. So like humidity was just like this crazy thing that when I got off the plane, it's like 101 degrees. It's incredibly humid. And I was just sort of like, "Oh, this is just kind of like all bad, right?" But lo and behold, my experience was fantastic. When I was able to go into the department, meet all these folks, it was a very supportive community. Was able to really accomplish a lot of great things. And funny enough, after those 2 years I did in my master's degree, I ended up staying 4 more years for the PhD. So, it was a well worth investment of my time.
Sounds like it was a an interesting part of the journey, and definitely worthwhile. So you went, you got the degree, you got the master, the graduate degrees, you got the PhD. You're
Mhm.
coming out, and if I remember when we talked or before, that was almost kind of as you're coming out of the school or finishing that up is about the time that COVID hit, started shutting things down. So you figured, why not start business during this time? Is that about right, or how did that go?
Yeah, sure. So, funny enough, I was actually still at the school when I even started coming up with new ideas. Because for anybody who's kind of gotten, sort of gone through the doctorate, journey, if you do the master's degree and the doctorate together, in one place, you usually actually take care of all the required coursework by the time you end your first or year and a half of PhD, right? So I had already done all of my required coursework, and that was taking up a considerable amount of time. I'd probably say like trying to finish all of that was like three. I would say like three classes was about 30 hours in a week to always prepare for those things. So once I had that time back for me, that was kind of when I realized, a little bit during that time, I had just said, well, I have the resources here, and I have, the availability to work on these weekends. Why not just start playing around with a few ideas? And so, kind of over the course of, I want to say 2017 to 2019 was like this age of experimentation. So like 2 years of me, basically throwing some hypotheses against the wall, doing lots of user interviews, testing out whether something was going to work or not. And, I had some thoughts about, well, this is actually something that I see as a problem. Let me see if it really is enough of a problem for me to actually want to pursue it. And so, a lot of the answers to that question was no in the early stages, but that's okay. But eventually I got to a point where in the summer of 2019, myself and one other person that I was working with at the time, who's currently still working with us, we thought that there was this idea that we could really kind of create a more personalized experience through some of the learning materials that we were sharing in the classes, because there was always just kind of this inkling of, I'm hopping on tons of Zoom meetings. This is even before COVID.
Mm,
So I'm hopping on tons of Zoom meetings. I'm, doing my very best to, help these students, but I'm getting a lot of requests about a lot of the same thing, but we don't have any replicable way for me to share my information. And even when I do, like, let's say record like a video for everybody, it gets lost. Then I have to do it again next year, or it gets lost in some kind of repository. Nobody can really find it, and it's not helpful year to year. And when I leave, it's basically going to have to be done again. So I was
mm,
thinking about, how do we make this a lot more efficient of the process? And that was kind of like the first sort of foray into what would eventually become the, kind of seedling of what our current company is.
mm.
But at the time, I had no idea, right? So the funny stories of user testing, we initially thought, oh, we're going to make it voice activated because, like, we'd gotten an Amazon Alexa and it felt like a good idea. So when we were trying to do user testing, we're literally sitting there, or I was, doing them across Zooms, similar to how we're doing it right now. But I would literally grab my Alexa, tell someone to actually go and use it through the video screen, and like basically have them yell through the screen and say, "Oh yeah, this is totally how the experience is similarly going to work. Was it cool? Like, was this useful to you?" And
Mm.
so, hilariously enough, at the time, I thought that that was enough data for me to actually say this is going to be an opportunity. So I made a few different, kind of versions of it, and then we, kind of rolled out our initial kind of low fidelity version that I was going to start testing with folks using like a web interface. And I was so excited. It's like February 24th, 2020. We incorporated the company even while I was still at school. But hilariously enough, of course, nobody had any idea that we would have COVID happen. So of course, I was sitting there stoked. This is going to be great. We're going to get so much data. This is, awesome. I'm going to have the students use it. I can see everything that's going to happen. But inevitably, what happened was everybody started to, of course, have to work from home, because of the, all of the sort of, policies that were put in place. So, of course, I at first, kind of was like, damn, how are we actually going to get this in the hands of more people? And then I realized, duh, it's the internet. I can actually go and share this with anybody I want to. And the crazy thing was, because it was a way more efficient way to actually share information. A lot of the students were just incredibly grateful because they were making, tons of video recordings in class itself, and they were sharing them around, and nobody was watching them. That when they ran it through our system, once we did that, students were actually engaging with it to an incredible degree, and we were getting tons of positive feedback from the students. And the professors were
Mm.
happy because, the students weren't emailing them as much about questions they had. They could literally just find everything laid out for them. And so really the office hours or the individual meetings that people were asking for were therefore more productive, even during a time with COVID. So that that sort of initial insight and the positive response we got, and just how much usage the initial like MVP had, just gave us that confidence to say like this is actually something that we can kind of run with, and we felt like we had caught like lightning in a bottle almost on accident. But I realize now it was kind of all those steps that we took that really helped set the foundation for what could be now where we're at in the future.
No, it sounds like it was a fun path, a good journey, and it was kind of, it's always interesting as you kind of going through that, where the product initially starts out versus where it ends up is rarely the same place. And so now, as we've kind of now caught up to the present day, and seems like the journey's already flown by, but we're already wrapping towards the end of the episode. So to shift or as we shift towards the end of the episode, I always like to wrap up with the same two questions. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite questions, because I feel like sometimes I kind of like to audit myself on a regular basis, right? Like, and I feel like it's good to kind of look at decisions I made, a day ago, a week, month ago, right? But I always look at the particular decision of hiring incorrectly, right? And I would say that anytime where you bring in you don't really kind of do your due diligence on like trying to figure out if somebody's going to be a right fit. You spend the time training them, bringing them in, and then sort of working with them. That's there's all like multiple things that kind of can go wrong in terms of that. And so for myself, hiring somebody early, it was really really early days, right? And it was one of the worst decisions I made for a number of reasons. But we brought in this person who we thought was going to be like a lead engineer for what we were doing. Right? We
Mm,
were, basically four folks at the time. One of us was really technical, but she was still transitioning from her job into whether this would actually be a good enough opportunity to like jump in on. So, of course, because of that, we really were limited on what we could even build and what we could actually even accomplish at the time. So, I thought to myself, well, why don't we just bring in kind of like sort of a technical partner? They can be part of our team, and we can kind of leverage their ideas and their instincts about how we can build the product forward. It's just another voice to be able to help us really grow this thing.
mm,
And at the time I was utilizing something called Lunch Club. And this wasn't through Lunch Club that I met this person, but through a friend of mine who I introduced the platform to. She recommended I meet this guy because she felt like he might be a good fit in terms of our development. And I kind of thought to myself, okay, well, cool. This is a recommendation from somebody I know. I'm sure that she's, kind of vetted him in some way. She said he was a little quirky, but I like quirky people. I feel like there's, that's better to work with people who, are unique in that way. So I was excited just on that premise to meet her or meet him alone. Um, so moving into the whole vetting process, I had a few conversations with him, just kind of, sort of see, is there, at least like a personality fit? Can we have like a normal conversation? Is there something that we can do in terms of just like kind of, feeling like we can connect with each other and really, sort of move this thing forward? Because, with anybody you bring in early stage or anybody you kind of, you're kind of like, really trying to sort of build this culture together. It's those early people are so important because they have to believe in not only the idea, but the idea that you can all achieve something together, right?
mm-hmm,
So when I brought him in, this is the naivete of like somebody who obviously didn't really have the chops to know what works and what doesn't. So I bring him in, and the first he sounds good. He talks, a good game. Says he's going to get certain things accomplished. And what's funny is our other technical person who was kind of transitioning out of her role that she was working with was consistently telling me, I don't think this guy's legit. And of course, me being somebody who wants to sort of believe people at face value, of
mm,
course, was like, why don't we just give him a shot? Let's give him let's give him a chance, right? And so as an initial pilot project. It was something so simple. And this is probably one of the stupidest parts of this, whole event was I had offered him a 1% stake as part of, it was initially going to be like a 10%
Mm,
stake of equity to like, say, hey, you're going to be this partner. And then over time it can, ladder up and, 1 year cliff, all of that. Right. So basically, I was like, hey, if you just accomplish this one thing, we'll give you 1% equity. And it was like the smallest, littlest thing to do, like really in the case of coding. And um that probably is the dumbest part of this dumbest decision I ever made. But hilariously enough, he didn't even do that. Like he over the course of 6 weeks didn't do anything. And we kept on trying to work with him. I got a lot of excuses about, hey, I'm busy doing this. I'll come up with this version, shortly. And then, there was this really crazy like excuse I got where, we didn't hear from him for a week when we were supposed to have a deliverable we were going to roll out during a large, not a large scale event, but like our first like public event to like try and see how people would react to what we were using. Didn't hear from him for a week. And then like
mm.
the week after that event happened, which was on a Saturday, the Monday after that, he messages me back and says, hey, like I actually got into like a car accident, blah blah blah. And like even though I wanted to believe him, it just didn't feel like it was true.
Mm.
And so, I didn't hear from him again for another 2 weeks after that, right? And eventually I was like, hey, you said that you would get these done, even though you said, you were, he said he'd obviously been injured, but he was like, hey, I'm gonna get all this stuff done. I promise I'll get it done. It'll be to you at this time. And so I just wanted to like, I wanted to believe, right? And I wanted to, believe that he would even get that 1% bar done. But after 6 weeks I was kind of like, you keep telling me all of these things but you're not doing them. And even just any progress being made, there just didn't sound like there was any progress. It was always kind of excuses even from day one. And at the end of it I was like, hey, I think it's just best to just obviously like kind of part ways here. I think that we need to move on with other people, because and of course it
Yeah.
came at the end of a little like sort of mini confrontation basically about it. So hilariously enough, my bad decision, the dumbest decision I ever made, actually didn't bite me didn't actually bite me in the ass, right? But it's just funny to see that like what can possibly happen. And I would just recommend that if anybody were to, of course, go down
And
that
no, I'm going to jump in just because now you're giving your or maybe your one recommendation, which is my second
path. Oh,
question. So
sorry.
we'll hold that to the or hold that for just a second. But I think that I do like, I think that when you get into a lot of times you're a bit naive in the sense that you think everybody's going to work as hard as you are, everybody's
Right.
going to do as a good job. They're all motivated, they all want it to be successful, and a lot of people do. A lot of people work hard, but not everybody's that way. And until you go through it, a lot of times you don't realize that there is a bit of a sifting process. So I think that's a easy mistake to make, but a great one to learn from. So now I'm going to jump to that second question, where it seemed like that's where you were headed. But if you're to maybe give that, talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, absolutely. Time and time again, I mean, you can always talk about, sort of technical, you can always talk about like, sort of other aspects like, hey, you need to figure out how you can scalably do something, or you need to figure out like what's the return on value or things like that. I believe all those things are to be true. But I do believe that it's one of the most important things to have people that you truly can actually really work together and cooperate with in a way that actually can be better than the sum of your parts, right?
Mm,
I know that's a cliched phrase, but really, the folks that you work with, are some of the most important considerations that you make. I've seen so many times where founders, it's crazy too. Like founders that I know who they founded the company together, and they had disagreements about sort of how the equity would be broken up because they didn't have an agreement when they started.
yeah.
right?
And I think that, there's a lot of those things. And I think that, be able to identify those early on and figure them out is definitely a great piece of advice or a great takeaway. So now, as we are wrapping towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure, absolutely. So the company that I started is called FreeFuse. You can find me at FreeFuse, which is FreeFuse.com. And of course, for myself, you can find me at Mike at freefuse.com. Also, finding the URL and owning the domain for that is actually a hilarious story in and of itself. But if you would like to reach out to me, feel free. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Mike Liu, CEO of FreeFuse. I have this really funny picture of myself that I took where I thought it would look really, really good, but it was really windy that day. And so I have this little like hair thing right in front of my face. So if you ever need to find me, feel free to find that picture or feel free to email me. Happy to have a conversation with you and look forward to connecting with anybody who would like.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out to you, or connect with you. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Mike, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review so we can make sure to help all those there are startups and small businesses out there along their journey to success. Last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Mike, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin. Appreciate the time.